Hi folks, welcome to part 2 of the puppet combo Iceberg. This layer, which should be slightly above the absolute middle of the iceberg, is where the whole structure starts to transition to much more recherche topics. It'll consist of games and theories a good chunk of puppet combo fans probably still know, but are rarely discussed or remembered. Halloween 3D was an early 2000s game development project started all the way back in 2002 by Ben Kakuza, i.e. a decade before he became Pig Farmer Games. We can't say as to why there was such a long disconnect between the release date of Babysitter Bloodbath and the beginning of Halloween 3D's development, but what we can tell you about the multiple versions released over the course of a decade and what the game was meant to encompass is that, judging from the beta releases that are actually available on the internet, the game is meant to have the player take control of Michael Myers at some sort of psychiatric hospital and kill everyone inside. To veteran puppet combo fans, this should immediately remind you of Sanitarium Massacre's gameplay, because that game also had the player just going around and killing everyone in sight stealthily. The peculiar thing is, considering the NPC competence and the stealth mechanics, Halloween 3D seems more thoroughly developed than Sanitarium Massacre, which is very interesting, seeing as we would have thought that around the time 2012 rolled around, puppet combo ought to have a good amount of experience developing games. One possibility as to why there's a difference in the quality of development is that Halloween was developed with, well, the 3D game studio. We're inclined to believe Sanitarium Massacre was developed with Quake going off of one of Puppet Combo's tweets, so converting all the assets from one engine to another must have been painstakingly laborious. Another possibility is that since Halloween was developed over a long period of time, the game was optimized more, whereas Sanitarium Massacre's development might have been halted early into the game-making process. Logs from the Pig Farmer website state that on July 26th of 2002, Puppet Combo wrote, "Oldest demo I still have. You play as Dr. Loomis and have to search the Myers house. Remake of Beta 1.0. 3 years later, on May 5th of 2005, he wrote, "Another remake of the Myers house level. Shows off the new camera, weapon system, and models." Fast forwarding to August 14th, 2012. For the sake of brevity, there is no About section available for this version. However, it is known that this version introduced the ability to cut the power from the victims' homes and turn off the lights. What we think this demonstrates is Halloween 3D, which was a precursor to Sanitarium Massacre and A Monster with Eyes of Ice, actually starting to become both games at the same time, seeing as the last log has it incorporating elements of home invasion. It's believed by Puppet Combo fans that the reason the title Halloween 3D was scrapped, and the game was essentially split into two projects, redeveloped, and then had a sequel attached to them, is because of legal issues with the Halloween series license owners. Specifically, the license might have been too expensive, or they might not have let him buy rights to it in the first place, but this is just conjecture. While we're here, we might as well talk about how upon Halloween 3D's rebranding, Nicholas Burr was slated to be the playable character in both Sanitarium Massacre and A Monster with Eyes of Ice, as well as be the protagonist in Babysitter Bloodbath respectively. In addition to this, Babysitter Bloodbath was also made into a novel, so it seems as if early on, this character was the lifeblood of Pig Farmer Games, and has at least remained a staple of the game studio for quite a while. As a matter of fact, the novel greatly elucidates Burr's backstory and why he is the way he is. Apparently, 22 years prior to the events of the novel, Burr was a married blue-collar worker with kids living just outside of Monroe, Washington. Even though no one in his family or law enforcement sees him as having any mental abnormalities, one day he gets back home from a shift, and for the thrill of it, he slashes the throat of his wife, stabs his young daughter to death, and here's where it gets really comical, kills his infant son by biting his head off. He's taken to Monroe State Hospital, and after spending 22 years there, the events of the Burr trilogy unfold, only somewhat clinging to the story laid out in the games. Personally, we prefer it if Burr's backstory remains a mystery, and with this, he makes one more appearance in the mythos, or gets an Easter egg or two dedicated to him. This is yet another unreleased one by Puppet Combo, and it follows the events immediately after Sanitarium Massacre. After Nicholas Burr manages to escape Lincoln State Mental Hospital, he starts breaking into the houses of random residents of Monroe, Washington, and starts murdering them. Brutal, just the way we like it. This game seems to emphasize stealth as a core part of its experience, since like many in said genre, the player being detected depends upon the brightness of the area they're currently in, and if spotted, characters either get the hell out of Dodge or hide and call the cops. In another characteristic not so vaguely like Manhunt, weapons can be found scattered at various places across the map but aren't different in any meaningful way. They're purely there for aesthetic purposes. The 12-year-old trailer, yeah that's right, very old promotional material for these games is going to be a common theme, seems to showcase pretty much exactly what we described. Our old pal Nicky Boy sneaks into a house with an unlocked door and kills what looks like an older man and a younger woman, all while what we think is a creepy children's song plays in the background. Here's a piece of advice, folks. Next time a homicidal maniac escapes from whatever your local residence for the criminally insane is, it's probably a good idea to lock your doors. We know, we were surprised that lesson wasn't taught in schools as well. Then again, it should have occurred to these latest Darwin Award nominees. Buzzsaw Bloodhouse is a parkour survival horror game from 2017 in which players take control of schoolgirls who must navigate through some sort of funhouse-style location while getting past deadly traps and obstacles with their lives. As hard as it goes, this latest season of American Ninja Warrior doesn't stop there, because a chainsaw-wielding homicidal maniac appears from time to time, attempting to maim the girls to pieces. On top of that, the season is streamed over darknets, which is very impressive considering the bandwidth to connect all those relays would be almost impossible, and has a live chat on the screen. It's mostly the viewers horny posting, but still, what other show has this much live direct audience input? Considered by many, including ourselves, to be the most difficult puppet combo game, the different updates to it have added more and more unique traps and themes to the project, which all test the player's coordination, competence, and resolve to endure such a challenging experience. We now consider this part of the iceberg the very middle of its overall structure, and this layer will consist of projects and theories we believe a good majority of Puppet Combo fans don't know. Keep in mind that as we go further and further down, we're delving into more disturbing and unheard of concepts, so we're warning you now in case you're off guard later. Those of you who watched our video on movies Puppet Combo fans would enjoy watching would know Italian horror director Lucio Fulci's Giallo movies had a direct influence on Puppet Combo. Specifically, the premise of The Night Ripper, the game we mentioned in part 1, takes heavy inspiration from the '82 movie New York Ripper, which is a giallo featuring a police lieutenant investigating a series of murders committed by a serial killer who targets young women, but mostly those who are prostitutes, for reasons we won't spoil here. What's peculiar about the New York Ripper is that he not only wields switchblades in addition to safety razors, but he also quacks like a duck every time he kills as well. All of this to say, it's patent that Fulci's work has inspired a story or two Puppet Combo has presented. Puppet Combo sells a wide array of merchandise that includes, but isn't limited to, t-shirts, hoodies, phone cases, blankets, shorts, pillows, masks, and even tights. We specifically want to focus on the t-shirts because we think they had some of the sickest designs in terms of art put on merch. We think a lot of the game covers have been well translated to something that could be put on a solid black shirt, and Puppet Combo's Twitter seems to feature models in tights presenting the shirts. Isn't that fun? We figured for this entry in the script, we'd get two birds with one stone because one of these is a reboot of the other. Evil Clowns is a 2019 boomer shooter survival horror game developed by Puppet Combo. The current version has the player take control of Jean, who went to a fair with her friends but fell asleep. When she woke up, the funhouse was already closed, and creepy demonic clowns were roaming all over the place. To get through each stage, the player must collect a specific number of coins for that stage, and then once that's accomplished, get to the exit. Throughout each stage, the game provides the player with weapons to fight back against the clowns who are also armed with guns and knives. Specifically, since these clowns seem to have recently raided their local federal armories and Home Depots, They go after Gene with chainsaws and pistols, so to give Gene a fighting chance, pistols, Uzis, Tommy guns, shotguns, melee weapons, and ammunition are scattered throughout the stages. Each stage has a specific theme, with one being a funhouse, the second being a haunted mansion, and the third being amusement park construction. All these stages represent specific parts of the carnival. As for its reboot, Night of the Clowns, it just spawns the player in a room and briefs them with text saying, "I hope I can find a way out of here." One core mechanic that separates this game from its precursor is that it gives you the option to use a flashlight to see and risk getting detected by the clowns, or to not use it at all and see and worse in exchange for running a lower risk of getting detected. More broadly, the player can spend a good chunk of this game stealthily slipping past the clowns if they so choose, whereas with evil clowns, doing that pretty much wasn't the option. Another departure is that the map in this game is less thematic but more immersive and fleshed out in terms of its interactivity at the same time. One disadvantage this project has compared to its original is that the stealth feels unchallenging, because these clowns seem like they're blind. We assume the lore made the clowns into robots because the same sound effects keep on playing from what sound like those shitty Bose speakers your teacher used when they wanted to play a video on the projector, and their patterns are easy to predict because once you've observed them, you'll always guess where they're going correctly. This stifles the player's need to employ clever stealth tactics because so long as they're not physically pressed up directly against Bozo's robot body, it's hard for them to get noticed. Flaws like this are what make attempts at stealth feel fruitless. All in all, we think Evil Clowns beats Night of the Clowns because it's more action-packed fun, but both are good, especially if you like clown-based horror. In Nun Massacre and Stay Out of the House, a few of what are precisely the same puzzles are used to advance through certain parts of the games. For instance, in both projects, the player has to collect a certain number of mutilated body parts and put them on a scale so a gear can be ejected out. Then the player has to put said gear into a grandfather clock, wind the hands to a certain point, let the clock strike, and then the games deviate in how they let the player progress from here. As we covered in part 1 of the Iceberg, the Unfinished World series is a pair of anthology compilations of Puppet Combo's unfinished games, with the first installment having 4 entries and the other having 3. Because it's much less known, we've decided to make these games entries in this specific part of the Iceberg. The first unfinished game in the second volume is Sanitarium Massacre, as we've covered previously. The next sort of interactive experience is called Shark Boat, and literally all it consists of is a few seconds of found footage from the protagonist's perspective, in which they're on a raft looking out towards the horizon. A shark's fin comes along, and then it fades. They're really making the Patreon money worth it on this one, aren't they? Succeeding that is Clown Motel, which has the player take control of one clown who's seemingly identical to a row of 3 others who just stand in place. The map consists of a backdrop of what looks like a wood prop of an old western town, but clown-themed. It looks like it's located in a place where it's winter, but the funny thing is, what appears to be a background filled with trees is actually solid wall. This carnival-themed version of The Truman Show is nowhere near as developed, nor is it anywhere near as fun. We don't even think it can be described as an alpha version of a game. The solution to the inevitable boredom you'll face is walking off what seems like a ledge and falling into oblivion. We're not sure if that kills you, but it's the best option you have. Up next is Volume 3, and boy will these remind you that you could have spent your time playing good games, and games that are actually, developed. The first up in this volume is Blood Lake, which has the player take control of Jeff West from PDM from a third-person perspective. It spawns you in front of a house in which you can just lead Jeff inside of and encounter this game's super tall maniac, but at some point he must have been lobotomized because all he does is stand there. You can greet him by saying, "How's the view from up there?" but that won't get him to move or take any action. From here, the player can choose to explore a couple of houses. One of them has a boatload of nothing, which reifies our theory that everyone in the Puppet Combo universe is desperately trying to move out of where they live. The next house poses a specific challenge to us in that we'd tell you what's in it, dear viewer, although if we had to wager, we'd put our money on nothing being in there as well. But you can't get into it. You crack the door open to peek inside, but other than that, you can't actually step inside. Not to mention the fact that one of the entrances seems to be missing a staircase. Yeah, it's no wonder a completely empty house is free to squat in alongside the added bonus of real estate, with this amount of square footage having not been sold yet. Maybe our worthless real estate theory deserves a spot in this iceberg. Anyway, the third house most players will probably come upon has their invisible force field problem cranked up to 11, as something prevents you from being able to access it from most places around it, except from a very small portion of space in the front. There's also a male mannequin-looking thing floating above the ground right next to the house, because, of course, there is. Speaking of floating, there's a house that actually has a doorstep, but the house is suspended in midair. Fuck this! Speaking of the most unhinged real estate one could think of, we feel it's right to transition into the Power Drill Massacre 2 prototype. First of all, it seems to respawn your character in some sort of Old West style environment, without the townhouse, saloons, banks, and brothels, and as boring as we think tourist trap style Old West attractions like Tombstone, Marfa, and Deadwood are. You'll be significantly more entertained there than you would be playing this game, because boy is there not much in this one. If you wanted to just run around on federal land and do nothing for a few hours, you could go to Nevada, run around, and do nothing for a few hours. There's a 19th century style house that has a properly textured interior and exterior, but there's no props or household appliances on the inside, which makes it give off this sort of open house vibe, even though it'd probably be pointless to list it because there doesn't seem to be anywhere someone could harness utilities in the house in question. If you go far enough towards one section of the map, there's a gas station. And the road that leads to it has grass, no clipping through it. If you get past that, the map's texture just abruptly cuts off and you hit the skybox. Something we took note of is that the player model for this one in Burnt Alive, which we covered in the previous part of the Iceberg, hence it not getting a proper overview in this part, are nearly identical, with pretty much just the hair being modeled differently. But since these are explicitly unfinished games, isn't the joke on us? In addition to the insert Lowe's appliance on clearance any day of the year, here then stick the word massacre after it title formula, this is also a Twitter exclusive puppet combo game. For those of you who don't get it, it's an unfinished game that doesn't even have a build version on Patreon, and stills, videos, and other first-hand promotional material are only found on social media. From what we can piece together about this game, from knowing what we know, it takes place at a house party, but its attendees start gradually disappearing. And sensing the presence of a threat, they have to survive with the player taking control of one of the central characters. In a cutscene uploaded to Twitter as far back as 7 years ago, yeah, goes to show how much he has on the back burner, Amy and Tiffany are the first characters introduced and are driving to the party. When Tiffany first sees the house, she gets a dreadful feeling and wants to go back home, but Amy insists that it'll be okay. In the video included in the second tweet, it's not exactly clear at which point the viewer is at in terms of the plot, but since the characters seem nonchalant, we think it can be assumed it's soon after Tiffany and Amy get to the party. The video features a green-haired girl and a boy chatting, a girl who's dancing, and a blonde girl that follows the player's character, who are presumably Amy and Tiffany respectively. In a third video tweet, it features Amy and Tiffany, but they have Megan's player model, and the interior of the house they leave from is mostly monotone gray. Before they get in the car and start driving, they call some guy named Justin, who's speculated to be the chatting guy mentioned earlier. On YouTube, there's also a decently gory death scene involving quite the stockpile of pitchforks, so don't let anyone tell you these games haven't lived up to their names. Other than that, there's not much available that'll give us insight into this game. If you're wondering why you haven't played this one before, you guessed correctly. This is another one that was announced in early 2020, and as of us writing this script, it's still on hold, with everything we know about this game coming from Puppet Combo's social media and the developer's fan wiki. It seems to be yet another Silent Hill style game with an appearance and general gameplay closely resembling the glass staircase. The main character, appropriately named the Gunslinger, although we would have gone with the neighborhood watch guy to be more fitting, fends off hostile enemies with his rifle, one of which includes an unknown cloaked entity and a large entity in a diving suit by the name of Wet Willy. The title translates to darkness or obscurity in Italian and gloom in Latin, and was originally referred to as the Plague Hospital before being given its current name. The game's name also reminded us of the 1982 giallo by Argento titled Tenebra, which is the plural form of Tenebra. It doesn't seem like the movie has much to do with the game, but it was just an interesting bit of Googling we did. Now we're delving into territory that consists of games and theories the vast majority of Puppet Combo fans aren't aware of. And as a matter of fact, some of these entries are ones we weren't even aware of before we started doing the Googling for this video. Since the script for this part of the Iceberg only includes one entry, it will be continued in the next part because it's a very big section. We're of the opinion that this one truly deserves its place so low in the Iceberg because apparently this game has been out for just over 4 years, and we just found out about it during the research phase of writing the script. If we of all people don't know a Torture Star game came out, especially if it has quite a few touches of dark humor, that's something really esoteric. We probably forgot the trailer for it came out and didn't check the Patreon in time for it to not get drowned out by the newer games that piled up. In the retro-style horror game The Summoning, the player assumes the role of a security guard named Murphy, who's tasked with monitoring an already abandoned and haunted house that murder had occurred at the previous night, and now it's being watched by the security company Murphy works for to prevent vandalism and trespassing. The game starts with Murphy arriving at the house, which is in turn a desolate neighborhood. We're starting to think the entire Puppet Combo mythos is an alternate timeline where a 2008-style housing crash occurred, but it was on steroids, so pretty much every house with a white bread family in it lost value. Anyway, after Murphy takes over for the guy on day shift, Walter, the actual gameplay begins with the player exploring the house, inspecting security cameras, and wandering through dark, eerie hallways filled with strange noises, all while the game's increasingly ominous, albeit quality and at the same time authentically retro, soundtrack plays in the background. Throughout the game, Murphy finds old notes that describe sequences of events that have taken place, such as a vagrant hearing voices and a chilling note from someone who was held captive in the house. He also finds VHS tapes that are quite literally just ColecoVision-style snuff tapes, and creepy ones at that. And we think these really do well in selling the sense of foreboding, as Murphy uncovers the history of the house. As he investigates, he begins to experience strange occurrences which include, but certainly aren't limited to, mirrors reflecting things that aren't even there, whispers and very unsettling visuals that, because of their pixelated nature, are hard to describe. The player is also tasked with solving puzzles, such as one that requires a hammer to break into a boarded up area for the sake of progressing the investigation. He finds disturbing things like a rusty gurney and signs of torture. At one point, he encounters a gruesome, smiling figure with black holes for eyes that ominously whispers to him. The game also features its fair share of over-the-top moments, which give it a certain element of camp, but its overall eerie vibe is still there. On a bit of a more thematic level, the game deconstructs the Murphy's Law trope, where things only go wrong for the protagonist, offering a mix of dark humor and existential dread, especially with Murphy's inevitable failure to escape or survive weighing on the player's mind as the game progresses. The game doesn't offer a clear good ending for Murphy, but shouldn't one assume that knowing his name? And with that, we conclude the second part of this Iceberg. Stay tuned for the third and final installment that's coming soon.